Hello, everybody. I am Linda Bloom, and I am a psychotherapist in private practice, and I specialize in working with couples to have the greatest relationships that they can have. I often work with my husband, Charlie, and we teach workshops both on the East Coast and on the West Coast. On the East Coast, we come to Kripalu in the Berkshire Mountains in Lenox, Massachusetts. And on the West Coast, we teach at Esalen Institute in Big Sur. In addition to seeing individuals and couples and teaching seminars, we've written 5 books. I'm happy to report that the first one was a runaway bestseller. It's called 101 Things I Wish I Knew When I Got Married, Simple Lessons to Make Love Last. And it's a big deal for a first-time author to sell over 100,000 copies. I'm very proud about that. We were well trained when we went to graduate school, but where we learned what we learned about relationship was in the trenches of our own relationship, because we're very different. We've been married for over 50 years. We've been together for 55 years, and that's a lot of working it out. So one of our claims to fame is, after all this time together, we're ecstatically happy and very much in love. And so we have a lot of practical wisdom to offer the people who work with us.
That is all amazing. I would love to dig in a little bit more about how you got into that field. And then I do want to bring it to like death and dying and what what does this all have to do with each other? So first, like how did you start on your career journey?
Well, my husband was a seminar leader for an organization that was extremely popular and hit its heyday back in the 80s. And the organization where he worked, teaching 5-day seminars, did some weekend workshops. And they asked us if we would write a workshop, and we did. We called it Partners in Commitment, and that got us started on teaching workshops. And when he retired from his corporate world working with that organization, we said that workshop is pure gold. We really ought to do that on our own. So we started our own business and we started teaching Partners in Commitment. Then that morphed into Secrets of Relationship. Then we offered another one called Love, Sex, and Intimacy. And we had more workshops because the people who did the Secrets of Great Relationships says, what else you got? And we did From Conflict to Connection. And we wrote another workshop called the Hidden Gifts of the Shadow. And this is all about finding deep and meaningful communication and connection with other. Not just your lover, not just your spouse, not just your romantic partner, but the other important people in your life. They may be family, they may be friends. We call it the family of choice, the really close non-blood relatives, but they're as close to us as if they were our blood. And the way this relates to preparing to end of life success is often when people get to the end of their life, they do their life review and they have some regrets about how deep they didn't go, how honest they weren't, how risky they weren't, that they stayed in the comfort zone and they didn't really let the people that they loved deeply, who they valued so much, know how much they meant to them. And when you're weak and sick at the end, it's harder to do it. And so we try to awaken people by being mindful that we've got a limited time in this body and we better make use of it while we can to have as meaningful connection with the people that we love as possible.
That is beautiful. And how do you suggest people start those conversations so they don't have those, I wish I did or could or should have done some things? Like where does one begin and how early should you start something like that?
Yeah, we refer to this as regret prevention. And so just to have the intention is the most important thing, to stop the competing urgencies of our life, making a buck, building our careers, raising kids, trying to work out our daily routine, picking up the cleaning and picking up John at soccer and all those competing urgencies, that we need to cordon off time, designated time, and to do it on a regular basis with all of the people who are really important to us, to really connect. And I don't mean talking while we're, emptying the dishwasher. I mean, looking at each other in the eye, maybe holding hands, maybe touching each other. Um, I sometimes get really up close and personal with my husband, and I like to be in skin contact with him. We know we're having a meaningful conversation when we're really that close. And to speak about whatever is in our heart. Do you know? A lot of appreciation and gratitude for how this person is valuable to us, how they enrich our life, how we learn from them, even from the things that aggravate us. We can learn a lot from them, and to clear out the incompletions. Because sometimes people disappoint us, frustrate us, let us down, break agreements, do you know? And not to let resentment build up, because that tends to be divisive between people. And it's not to bring up the tough issues about the way we feel hurt or disappointed or afraid that the relationship is not as wonderful as it could be. It's not to blame them or shame them or make them bad and wrong. It's to keep the channel between the two of us open and free flowing, so the love and affection and appreciation can flow. And so when we talk to people about being honest and real in their relationships, it's not all the sweet strawberry slush stuff. Do you know, that's beautiful, but it's also sometimes it's some tough love to speak about the things that don't work, but always with the intention of moving the relationship to a more loving plane. One of the examples that I offer when we teach our workshops, I learned from Thich Nhat Hanh. He's not in his body anymore. He's a Buddhist master and scholar and a beautiful teacher. I did a lot of workshops with him and I admire his work. I admire many things about his work, but the best thing that I got from him was to sit with your beloved and ask from deep in your heart, how may I best love you? Isn't that profound? And you might be surprised, because you may be giving love the way you like to have love shown to you. And they may be longing for something that's quite different. And that is a meaningful conversation. It's getting out there on the skinny branches. Do you know, that's risky talk, but it's beautiful when it really flows.
I think that it's hard enough like in life. You're talking about acknowledging kind of the things that aren't so wonderful too about your relationship or with someone else. Um, and I think that throughout life, it's like hard enough to bring up those conversations, but then when you're dying, often people, or even after life, I've also seen that people only want to focus on the positives. Like everyone is like the best person ever, and that's like the part of your relationship you focused on. And that is a little bit less honest, I think, than how a lot of relationships go. So it's interesting to hear that to not have that regret, you need to kind of explore the entire relationship. And I think I have found that to be true in my life as well. So I'm glad you brought that up. I'm curious with you, when do couples, or maybe it's not always couples, people come and find you? How do they typically become one of your clients or get your advice? When do you see them?
Well, unfortunately, people are pretty pain tolerant. And more often than not, the couples that come to see me have been suffering for years, literally years. The disappointments, frustrations, broken agreements, broken trust, incompletions have been accumulating for a few to several years. I wish that they'd come sooner. It makes our work easier if they come earlier, but that's kind of the norm. The research shows, and I really respect John Gottman's work, the average couple before they come to their very first couples counseling session has been struggling for 6 years. Isn't that a heartbreak? Oh man, I wish they would do something sooner. But they finally get to the point where they can't bear it anymore. That's good news. And they're willing to risk some truth telling, getting help. I think in this culture here, it's such a independent, independence is worshiped in our culture. You're supposed to figure it out by yourself. In other cultures, we teach in Europe, we've taught in South America and Asia. They don't have it as bad as in the United States about this independence thing. And people are a little bit more comfortable asking for help from family and friends and clergy and professionals. But here we have that cultural dictate that you're supposed to figure out on your own. And when people finally are humbled and they say, we've tried everything we can and we're still struggling, and they consult the psychotherapist, couples counselor, all I'm looking for, I don't care how big the trouble is, and I don't care how long the trouble's been troubling them. I'm only looking for the commitment. Do you really want to dig in and take responsibility for the part that you have played and not be a helpless victim that it's them that's doing it? Of course, they have their part to play, but so do you. And you're really going to be empowered if you look at the way you have been showing up in this relationship. Maybe you haven't been honest, or maybe you've been critical and judgmental. Maybe you've been distant and withdrawn. Maybe you've been withholding. Maybe you have been nasty or bitchy, or maybe you have been preoccupied with the children or work. Maybe you haven't been honest. And so when people start to really take responsibility, that's when things start to move. When they confess. And I say, if you mess up, fess up. Take responsibility for it. Take the risk. People don't want to get vulnerable and say, I have been remiss because of this, that, and the other thing. But when you risk being vulnerable and you're truly apologetic and you're truly sorry for how you've let the other person down, that's when you can begin to make amends and put the corrections in, and the relationship can heal. And even if you've been in trouble for several years, in just a matter of weeks or a couple few months, things can really start to turn around.
Yeah, I think taking responsibility must be huge. That's also the hardest thing to do, though, is admit when you are wrong for a lot of people. Um, do you ever work with individuals or couples like post a divorce or a death or a loss? And like, what is it like to work with a couple or a person when the relationship isn't there anymore? Does that ever happen?
Often, yeah, it's frequently grief of loss that is so painful that brings people down to their knees. And the grief of a divorce is quite similar to the grief of when somebody dies. In some ways, it's worse because they chose out. The person that died wanted to stay in their body and to be healthy and to be present. But to be left from a divorce, or to be the person who precipitated the divorce, there can be a huge uproar in a person's life because their life is very changed. It might be a wonderful new beginning and a rebirth, but there's going to be a period of time where, like when a lobster sheds its carapace, that hides under the rocks because it's easy pickings for the other sea creatures to chew it up. And so we need to be very careful when we're in grief and to give ourselves time to not be so productive and knock them dead in the professional world and do the minimum. We need to keep raising our kids, but to take good care of ourselves because we're at risk to have a health problem ourselves at that time. But if people isolate too much, they're screwed, because to really complete the grief process has to be witnessed by other people, whether it's a divorce or a death. And sometimes it's a living loss. The person didn't die, but people have children who are incarcerated in prison or lost in drugs or alcohol. They don't even know if they're dead or alive. That grief needs to be honored and supported and witnessed. And so, yes, I do have people who come to see me because they're grieving, and to be present with those people in their anguish and pain helps them to get through it. And because I personally have had grievous loss, if you've lived to my age, you've lost some people who are really close to you. And so knowing the territory helps, and being the living proof that you can come through. Because sometimes people think they're never going to smile again. They're never going to laugh again. They're never going to, feel pleasure and enjoy life again. And you need to be with people who know the territory, who can inspire you and be models, that you never get over it, but you do learn how to manage it. And that there are some blessings that come with the loss, because the people who are in your life, you're on alert to really live those relationships and not have regrets about you didn't really fully utilize what was available to you in those close relationships.
And I can imagine that grief, I feel like the way that we typically talk about grief is only with a death loss. It must be just a tricky space to navigate when knowing that a person's still alive, but you're grieving them. Especially, I feel like in a divorce, there's often people are bringing in a lot of negative energy to that space in the first place. And so it's interesting to grieve someone while you're in the process of a divorce, I imagine, because you're like can see both sides of it. Like you're upset that the relationship is over, but you might know that it's not the right place for you to be. And that's very different than a death loss. But I feel like the grief itself might be the same, or the way you work through the grief. I don't know. Have you seen a difference in?
It's true.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's very similar. It's very similar. And a lot of people think about grief and mourning as if it's just the sadness of missing the person. And so they sometimes need to know that grief is the whole thing. Do you know the whole range of feelings, whether it's a divorce or a living loss or a person died, that there can be guilt, there can be shame, there can be rage, there can be anger, and a whole lot of it is irrational. Do you know? That person died. I'm so mad at them for leaving me. I feel abandoned, but that's part of grief and needs to be honored and expressed. And you can feel crazy, and you can feel suicidal, and you can feel like you want to join them, and life doesn't have any meaning for me anymore. I don't want to be in this body. It's too hard to be the person who's left behind. And that needs to be spoken and witnessed. Yeah, the whole thing. It's not just the sadness about missing somebody, to make room for all of it.
Do you ever work with families as a whole, like people's children as well, when if they're dealing with either divorce or loss or anything within their relationship, or do you typically stick to the couple themselves?
We make ourselves available if the couple is needing support in how to speak to their kids. And occasionally they will include their children. More often than not, we just coach them about how to speak to the kids, how to speak to the kids about the person in the family that's got the terminal illness and is dying, how to speak to the kids about the person who may have died, and how to speak to the kids if they've concluded that they're needing to divorce, that they're still a family. They're just going to live in two households, but they're still a family. And there's just as much love as before, and that the kids are going to be safe and secure, and they might not like it, and they may feel like they want to take sides, but there's always two sides to the story. And the kids need to be reassured at all ages that they didn't cause it. This was the adults that weren't able to work it out, because kids tend to think that they're the center of the universe, and it was because they weren't behaved enough that the parents are breaking up, because they've often heard the parents arguing about how to rear them. And so they take it very personally and feel like they drove their parents apart, and that's never the case.
Do you have any like common tips or tricks for parents to talk to their kids about either a loss or a divorce? And like how where do you typically start with a conversation like that?
Ask questions. Ask questions of the kids. I think that questions are highly undervalued, and to ask open-ended questions. And sometimes there's a question under the question, or a question inside the question. So say to the kids, is there anything on your mind that you would like to ask me? Is there anything that you feel that you may have done or not done, or said or not said, that has contributed to the problem? These kind of questions draw the kids out. They start to feel comfortable bringing forward their confusion and their concerns. And sometimes they're really angry. And why can't you two figure out how to do this so that we could all live in the same house? Yeah. So to ask explicitly, are you angry at dad? Are you angry at me? Do you feel that one of us is more at fault than the other? Do you know? These kind of questions draw the children out, and they need to be thanked for being honest. Thank you for being willing to tell me the truth about what's on your mind and what's on your heart, and then to leave it open, because sometimes the kids can only take small bits at a time. Sometimes the parents can only take small bits at a time, because it can get very heavy. But we're going to talk about this some more. So let any concerns or confusion or questions that you have pop up, and we're going to talk about this again.
Yeah, I think from my own side of it, like my research is obviously all end of life care, and one common thread is that adults don't give kids enough credit for how much they can understand about a death loss. And I imagine it's the same in a divorce, that people try to shelter their kids from something. And when in reality, like asking the questions or bringing up the conversation is more helpful than hiding details. And I just can imagine how similar that might be in a death as it is with a divorce. I am very pro bringing kids into the conversation, specifically around death, because I think that they know what's going on a lot of the time, and shielding them from it just causes more like distrust. Do you see something similar when there's like a death loss or a divorce loss, that kids do typically understand more than we give them credit for, or no?
The kids know a lot of what's going on. They overhear, and they I'm totally with you. I'm totally with you. They should not be shielded. Do you know? There is something scarier about the unspeakable, do you know, the hidden. they're liable to imagine worse things, that we're trying to protect them, but to keep them from going to the funeral, to keep them from seeing, grandma's body and the open coffin. To ask them, would you like to go to the funeral? Do you know? I'm willing to let you go if you want to go. If you don't want to see the body, I'm going to respect that. But if you want to see the body, if you want to touch the body, if you want to kiss grandma on the cheek, it's acceptable. And to ask the kids how they feel about it, do you know? And not to assume, and not to be so overprotective. In times in the past and in other cultures, do you know, death was more available. Everybody grew up with, granddaddy was laid out on the dining room table in the parlor, do you know, and you could touch him. Maybe the kids were there when the body was being washed and prepared for burial. And my husband and I teach, in other cultures. We've taken 9 groups to Bali, and all the kids in the whole neighborhood are there for the washing of the body and the preparation for the cremation. So they don't grow up with as much fear. It's a part of life, just like birth is a part of life and weddings are a part of life, and the death and dying and the burial is part of life. And I think we do, not just the kids, the adults too, a disservice when it's so sanitized and hidden away. Yeah, it's scarier.
It is scarier. I agree. It is a disservice to all of us. Um, I'm pivoting a little bit. I'm wondering if you help, actually, I know you do this, but I'm going to ask it as if I don't know that you do this. Help individuals navigate new relationships after a death or after a divorce. And what advice you might have where you start off after you've lost a partner, maybe you've been with them for a really long time. How do you dive back into a new relationship with someone?
Yeah, probably is a good idea to take time for your grief work first before you dive in too fast. But it's also important not to wait so long. Sometimes people are so frightened to love again that they wait years, and sometimes people won't ever dare to do it again. To trust that the human being is resilient, and that we can recover after grievous loss. And it is not a betrayal to the spouse that we had before or the lover that we had before. If it was a real loving relationship, they would want us to be happy. They wouldn't want us to be lonely. They wouldn't want us to be bored. And they would want the best for us. And I think it's kind of sweet to imagine that if they could speak to us now, if they could speak to us from, the other realm and advise us, because they didn't do it when they were still in the body, and say, I would really want you to partner again, honey. Please don't feel like it's going to be a betrayal to me. I just want you to be happy. But if they didn't do that, preparatory to their leaving their body, to imagine that they could advise you now. And in the vast majority of cases, I think if they really love us, they would want us to go on and get involved with somebody else. And it doesn't diminish what the person who had the loss had with the first partner.
Do you advise couples to talk about like the surviving person's relationship after death, and how do you bring up a conversation like that?
Yeah, it's bold. And a lot of people don't have that kind of conversation, but I advise people to be bold and to be risky, and anything that's laying there on their heart to say so. And my husband and I have had numerous conversations that if I'm the one who goes first, for him not to hold back, to let himself love again if he wants to, just to be careful, because he'll be very vulnerable, particularly that first year. People are like, I already told you about the lobster that sheds its carapace until it grows the new one, that you're easy pickings and you're very vulnerable. Just to be careful, but that I trust his judgment, that he will pick a loving person of high integrity that could enhance his life, and that I would really want that for him. And he said the same thing to me. So I feel blessed, since I'm so relationship oriented, that if I want to have a series of lovers, it's okay. I've got his blessing to do that. If I wanted to settle down with one person and that felt like it was the right thing for me. And if I wanted to be alone, that he trusts my judgment and that he only wants the best for me. And even if he's not in his body anymore, he wants me to feel his loving kindness and support, to have the best possible life that I can, even when he's not in my life anymore. And he knows that I want that for him too.
You're so lucky. That is so wonderful that you can talk to each other and be so, just want each other to be happy no matter what. I love that. I would hope all couples could do that. Um, do you ever talk with either couples or individuals about sex in older adulthood? How does sex kind of change over the course of your life? And maybe even like if your partner has a terminal illness or something, what does your sex life look like then? Do conversations like that come up in your work?
Absolutely. Yes. And the course that we're teaching next at Kripalu in October is Love, Sex, and Intimacy. And couples from all ages come to the class, and individuals and half of pairs can come too. We sometimes have singles come and to tool up so that when they have a romantic partner, they're positioned well. And sometimes we have one person in the pair who's really motivated to come to the class and the other person's not. We accept them too, that's fine. But mostly it's couples who come. And in the Love, Sex, and Intimacy class, there's all ages. So we've had couples who are 50 years together like us, and they're still growing. Hooray, I love that. And the sexual part of the relationship does change as your body ages. And it is a requirement to expand your definition of lovemaking, because it's not so much about erections and intercourse and orgasm anymore, but full body touch, and soul gazing and the heart talk and some bringing pleasure to the body, which can include intercourse and erections and orgasm, but not necessarily. But it doesn't mean that the sexual part of your relationship has to go by the by just because you've got an aging body. And maybe your hip hurts, and maybe your back hurts, and maybe your neck hurts. And to have sexual pleasure in your body releases that love cocktail, which is uh, gives you less pain. It's good for you. Those endorphins and those, oxytocin really are good for the body. So even when you have a terminal illness, even if you have a life-threatening illness, even if your body is weak, to at least have some caresses, because just touch, can be very sensual and release that love cocktail that is an aphrodisiac and pain relief. So to just be very open-minded about the lovemaking can continue till the last moment.
I like that. Yeah, I mean, in the US in particular, we're not very good about talking about sex or death in general. To me, those two things, well, all my grad school research was about the connection between sex and death, so I'm really all about that. I think they're very interconnected. But I think that there are these like two taboo topics that every single person, for the most part, has sex, or we know for sure that everyone was conceived in some manner, most likely via sex. And then we're all gonna die. And I feel like those are two topics though that people just aren't comfortable talking about. And it to me, there's like this interconnection between why are these two things like the things that we hide from children or the things that we're not comfortable talking about in public, whatever it might be. And yet they're two of the most like universal human things that make us human. It makes us a living being, actually. Most living beings have sex and die. And so I find there's such a dichotomy there between wanting or needing to talk about it or do it, and then the taboo nature of it and not talking about it at all. So I don't have a question out of that. I just see this weird link in my head and I want to connect them. Yeah.
They're very linked. Um, the body losing its life force and the body feeling its life force when we have pleasure. And, you know, the majority of people, when they're interviewed in this country, want to die at home. They want to have a death that is going to be less painful and to feel secure in their home setting. And they have some power and influence about who's with them and have the people with them that they love the most and feel supported and cherished and honored by. And I know that part of that is wanting somebody's arms around us when we're uncomfortable, when we're frightened about stepping into the great unknown. And it's harder to do it in a hospital setting, not impossible, but harder when there's strangers around and machines, and you might feel reluctant to climb into bed and hold the person that you love in the way you really want to and the way they really want to. So I'm always working with the people who are elderly and may have a very difficult, life-threatening diagnosis to resist the temptation to put yourself in the hands of the medical community that will do all these heroic means at the end, which will prevent you from having the death at home that you want. And I was just reading Katie Butler's book. I think she's wonderful. And she talks about how few people are using hospice. Do you know they just are there for the last days or the last weeks when they could have had 6 months with hospice and they didn't face into it. They didn't face that this was really the end. Maybe the doctors weren't upfront with them, or the doctors tried to be upfront with them, but they were in denial about they were the end. And what a shame, because the chances of having the death at home, you know, with the pain cocktail that hospice is great for giving them, do you know that they could be alert enough to really enjoy the people around them and have a sweet death? Do you know where they would have those conversations about getting complete, about I forgive you for anything that you've done that hurt me, and I hope you can forgive me for anything that, you know, we've done to each other, that we've been so imperfect, but let's just forgive everything. And I love you so much. And none of those incompletions and none of those disappointments can tarnish that. And I will go on alone without you, and I can let you go, and your memory will be in my heart and mind forever. I will never forget you. Do you know those conversations are easier to have at home? They're not impossible to have in the hospital, but when you feel secure in your environment, you can have those kind of heart talks with all the people that are important to you.
It's so true. I think having the comfort of your home around you changes your dying experience in my experience. I also think you're so right about people not getting on hospice early enough. I think it's the same thing with palliative care. I think it's really misunderstood like what palliative care is, and it's just to help you with anything you're suffering from. And you can go on palliative care whenever. You don't need to even be remotely dying. And I think that it, if you do have a prolonged illness though, and you're not 6 months, but they don't project 6 months from now you'll be dead, then you can go on something like palliative care for long term and years ahead of time. And it's just not, there's no education there. And so people, I mean, unless you know someone who's died before, knowing about going to hospice 6 months before you're going to die, or knowing about palliative care, or even what it is not in your realm. You're never going to think of it because no one really talks about it for the most part. And so to me, like an education is so important to what you can do, what's available, what's out there for you. Um, and I think the earlier you plan, the more likely it is you can die at home. You could have an at-home funeral as long as you kind of like do the research beforehand to figure out what's allowed. And most of the time, most of what people want is allowed. You can die at home. You can keep your body at home for a few days. You can have a funeral at home. But unless you've done it before, you're not going to know that, or you're not going to search it out, you know? So
Will have supports that they're not aware of. And just around the same time I was reading Katie Butler's book, I read Anita Hanig, The Day I Die. And some states in the US, California's one of them, have assisted death. And if you're getting close to your death and you're in your right mind, you're not depressed and doctors testify about it, you can get a lethal dose. You have to administer it to yourself. You have to be able to swallow and take it. But I was very impressed with her book. If you're going to die just in a matter of, a week or two or days, that choosing to have that death with the people there that you want there, and that you can have a pain-free death, and that you can designate the time to get all of those things said to the people who are most important to you, and hear their testimonials about how incredibly important you've been to them, and then drop your body. And she says in the book, and I totally believe, that the survivors have an easier time of it afterward. Do you know? Because they got complete, and the things that needed to be said were said. It didn't take them by surprise. They faced the truth that they were going to lose this precious person, and they didn't lose the opportunity to really use it, to say the things they wanted to say.
I think everyone should have a living funeral or a living memorial where the people say the nice things while you're still there and everyone can hear it. I feel like we save all these really lovely things to say about someone after they died. And most of the time, no one takes the time to tell them when they're alive. Like everyone only shows up after they're dead. And I think I don't know why we do that. Like bring it in while the person's still here so that you can feel the love and like have a reciprocal conversation. And I would hope that that becomes more popular. And I think it has become a little bit more popular. We have about 15 minutes left. I'm wondering if there's any topics we haven't covered that you would like to cover.
What you were just mentioning, I think is of critical importance. We make a habit of it in our family, and my kids and my grandkids tease me about it because I call it the other kind of S&M. Do you know, the significant and meaningful, to have the conversations. My youngest grandson, when we were on vacation last week, we celebrated his birthday while we were on vacation. It was a pre-birthday celebration. And we try to get the emphasis off of the material stuff, the gifts. We give gifts, but we want to speak from the heart about what we admire about this person. So we went around the table, and my other grandsons and my husband and I told him what we admire about him. And we do it not just Thanksgiving about what we're grateful for. We do it at birthdays, yeah, and we do it off the cuff when it's no special occasion. It doesn't have to be an anniversary or a birthday. That we take the time to express appreciation and gratitude for all of the people who are important to us in our life. And I think that it gives people a joy jolt, do you know, when they're appreciated, that they're seen, that they're heard, that they're valued, that they're respected. And if we live in our relationships that way, that it's reciprocal, I think it makes it a little easier when we have to let them go, whether it's a divorce or whether it's our kids' empty nest and moving away and getting into their own lives and their own families, or whether it's a death. If we live the relationship fully, I don't think we're haunted by the if onlys. If only I'd told that person how much I love them. If only I'd given the details about what I loved and admired about them. If only I'd told them how much they taught me, what a shining example they were, what a model they were. And I really think that if we live our life that way, it's still going to be hard when they're not in the body anymore. But I don't think it's going to be as awful as if we didn't really live the relationship to the max while we had them.
I couldn't agree more. I think that I don't think we tell people enough how much we appreciate them. Um, and I mean, I'm like psycho about it. Like every single, I think I tell my family, my boyfriend, everyone, I love them like over 50 times a day. Every time I like hang up the phone. I'm so superstitious, but I also mean it. Like I think it's so important to let others know that they mean something to you and that they're valuable. Otherwise, like why the life wouldn't really be worth living without everyone else there with you. And so I think it's important to value those relationships. Um, I love that. And that's so special that you get to do that with your grandkids. I think we do that too. Actually, I do that with all my friends. Whenever we have a birthday party, we like go around and tell the person whose birthday it is how much, like what we like about them is kind of what we do. It's like our favorite part about you. And it's just a good way to make people feel loved. So yeah. And I think we sometimes people feel a lot more isolated than they are because I think we're not good about telling people how we appreciate them. And maybe they're less isolated than they think. Um, awesome. I don't have any other particular questions. I feel like we covered a lot of topics. Is there anything else you want to bring up or an end message, advice? It can really be anything.
I just want people to know that we have a lot of free things on our website, bloomwork.com. They can find out where our courses are. They can download 3 free ebooks from our website. There are over 600 blogs on Psychology Today, and there are links to the YouTube channel where we have many, many, many teachings about relationship, and it's all for free there. And if people want to contact us about questions they have about doing a course at Esalen or Kropalu, there's email and voicemail available on the website if they want to be in touch with us.
Amazing. And I will link that in the description as well. So I have all the links so people can find you as well. So that's great. Um, are you ready to stop the recording? You want to say anything?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I wanted to make sure we had time to